you've ever walked the streets of New York City, you've probably seen the colorful, flowing, provocative, and sometimes controversial graffiti that sprays the walls and coats bridges, textualizing the subway cars of the metropolis in a palimpsest of urban lore. Graffiti is a form of urban art that emerged in the 1970s as a way for young people, mostly from low-income and marginalized communities, to express themselves, challenge authority, be heard, and claim their space in the city. Graffiti artists, or writers as they called themselves, styles, techniques, and codes of conduct, creating a subculture that was both rebellious and creative. Get up, throw up, tag, be heard, blanket the city, show them we are here. But what happened to the graffiti scene in New York? How did it go from being an underground movement to a mainstream phenomenon that attracted the attention of the media, the fine art world, and even the corporate sector? In this essay, I will argue that the rise and fall of New York City graffiti can be traced to three main factors: the changing social and political context of the city, commodification and cooptation of graffiti by various institutions and industries who stole the aesthetic to market their own brands, and the internal conflicts and contradictions that arose organically within the community itself. Was the social and political context of the city in the 70s and 80s leading up to the 90s. This was a time of economic crisis, urban decay, crime, violence, and racial tension. This led to a sense of alienation and frustration among the youth. Graffiti was a way for them to cope with their harsh realities, to assert their identities, and to resist the oppression and neglect they faced from the authorities. Graffiti was also a way for them to communicate with each other, to form bonds of friendships and solidarity, and to compete for fame and recognition among the different boroughs, neighborhoods, and crews. Graffiti writers risked arrest, injury, and even death to paint their names and messages on trains, atop buildings. They created a visual culture that reflected their experiences, aspirations, and desperation. In that era, some of the influential writers, Tacky 183, considered the first modern graffiti writer. Lee, who pioneered whole car paintings. Blade, who painted over 5,000 trains. Lady Pink, one of the first few female writers of notoriety. Fab Five Freddy, who bridged graffiti with hip-hop culture. And Jean-Michel Basquiat, who transitioned from graffiti to fine art in the salon of Andy Warhol and the arms of Madonna before succumbing to an untimely death from AIDS. The second factor that influenced the graffiti scene in New York was the commodification and cooptation of graffiti by mainstream commercial institutions and industries. The Avenue of Americas got to the outer boroughs. As graffiti became more visible and popular in the city, it also attracted the interest of outsiders who saw it as a source of profit, prestige, or propaganda for their own messages. Outsider journalists, filmmakers, and academics like myself in this video, documented and analyzed graffiti as a social phenomenon, giving it exposure but also more perniciously stereotyping artists as deviant or exotic, marginalized subcultures that were there to be taken advantage of for economic gain. Think of Keith Haring's reception in life and the insane commodification as a brand name after his early death from AIDS. Art dealers, collectors, and curators who exhibited graffiti in galleries and museums gave it legitimacy with the wealthy, but they also commercialized street art as a purchasable commodity, for sale at Sotheby's, on the block right now, cause, a plastic sculpture. Advertisers, marketers, and designers used graffiti in campaigns, giving graffiti mass appeal, but also diluting it as a means of individual expression. Soon, even politicians, police officers, and community leaders jumped on the bandwagon and used street art and artists as a scapegoat for decay or poverty.
Oh, dogs, they'll bite. I said, well, that's what dogs are supposed to do.
A symbol of urban problems, or when they saw fit, solutions. These hanger-oners gave Graf attention, but also manipulated the art as a tool. A few examples include style wars, famous documentary film that showcased the graffiti culture. Subway Art, a book that popularized graph around the world. The Times Square Show, an infamous exhibition that introduced graph artists to the fine art world. The Fun Gallery, a gallery that represented solely graffiti artists. Adidas, which launched 1,000 campaigns on the back of graph artists. MTV, the cable network that through music videos and the popularization of rap and hip-hop culture jumped right on the back of the graffiti bandwagon. Mayor Ed Koch, who waged a war against graffiti while in office, high up in the skies of Manhattan. And Mayor Giuliani, who cleaned up graffiti as part of his zero-tolerance policy, sweeping the streets clean. Classic old-school propaganda that originates in the 1930s. The aforementioned Keith Haring, an artist who used graffiti motifs in his public art projects and in commissioned work. A site where graffiti was used as political statement and a means of communication across the Iron Curtain, from east to west and vice versa. The third factor that affected the graffiti scene in New York was the internal conflicts and contradictions within the graph community. As graffiti became more mainstream and lucrative, it created divisions and tensions, get rich or die trying, among graffiti writers who had different motivations, goals, and opinions about the meaning and value of their own artistic expression. Some writers embraced the opportunities that came with fame and fortune, while others rejected them, called them traitors, said they were fakes, posers. Some writers maintained their original styles and ethics, while others experimented with new forms and collaborations. Some writers stayed loyal to their crews and neighborhoods, while others crossed boundaries and alliances, became international superstars. A third option was to just retire or quit, to say that the neighborhood was over, so to speak. Here's a little laundry list of a couple big stars. Cause, who started as a graffiti writer, scribbling atop advertisements, aka culture jamming, and became one of the globe's most successful, rich, and famous designers and artists, showing public installations everywhere from Hong Kong Harbor to Qatar Airport. Banksy, whose whole persona was to use graffiti as a medium for satirical and subversive art. Rebs, who challenged the conventions of graffiti with steel sculptures, diary entries, and his palimpsest of autofiction. Espo, who painted his name and messages on storefronts with the permission of owners. Scene, who painted canvases. He literally brought street art into and onto a new medium, the canvas, where it could be sold and commodified. Cope 2, one of the real ones who remained faithful to their roots and style. Saber, who painted the largest graffiti piece in the world on the Los Angeles River. Obey, who famously made the Obama Hope poster for propaganda within the Democratic Party of the United States of America. In conclusion, the rise and fall of New York graffiti can be seen as a complex and dynamic process that involved multiple actors, forces, and outcomes. Graffiti was not just a form of art, but also a form of expression, communication, resistance, and a way to create an identity. Graph was not just a subculture, but also a culture that interacted with other cultures. Graffiti was not just a phenomenon, but is now also a history that speaks to the future through the context of the past. But graffiti is still alive and well today in New York and around the world. It has changed its face significantly, mutated and transmogrified since its origins in the 70s on the street. And whether one sees these changes as positive or negative ultimately depends on your own perspective and position, and the context within which you find yourself reading or listening or seeing.